Good morning on this Sunday, June 25th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. Georgia's elections officials doubled down on their decision to update voting machine software until after the 2024 election. Also, the politics behind the decision to cancel a political talk show and fire its host, Phil Nygatt. And a settlement in a Forever Chemicals case in Rome. Melita, Phil, and Martha are all here. Alicia Thomas-Cersei is here filling in for Theron. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
State elections officials went before the Georgia Election Board defending their decision to update voting machine software until after the 2024 election. They say this all comes down to time and security.
We're not really delaying it. I mean, we're doing it in a responsible way.
Chief Operating Officer for Georgia's Secretary of State's office, Gabriel Sterling, says the decision to wait to update the voting machine software was done with security in mind.
We can't take the risk with the system itself going into the 2024 election cycle, and that's why the decision was made. It's the responsible, sober decision to make.
The Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger told the Elections Board the current software is secure and battle tested. Phil, to you first this week. Do you agree?
I do not agree with Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, and I think it's irresponsible to say that. I think when the State Election Board is just stubborn and doubling down on the Dominion system, it's a mistake. I hope this is reversed. I mean, flies in the face of two recent reports, and we discussed some of it last week. And one report is from these national cybersecurity experts, over 20 plus of them, who are saying that this is vulnerable and that it can be hacked, and that in this era of cyber attacks, it's especially irresponsible. And so they won't even patch it. You know, if something happens to my laptop and malware gets in it, you patch it. I don't understand why this is happening. They don't want to admit that they're going to have problems and that it was a mistake, and it's very expensive to keep upgrading this.
Alicia, if they don't update this software by the 2024 elections, do you think then the naysayers or the folks who lose their election will have more ammunition to say, you know, obviously it's fraud?
No, let's talk about the naysayers. These are the people who want to sow doubt into the voting system, right? They are Trump allies. They are election deniers. And so if I have to choose between Trump folks and those who do this work every single day, I think our Secretary of State and his staff, you know, as he said, this whole situation is battle tested. He is battle tested. I think on their side, they've got integrity and truth and several investigations. I'm going to go with the Secretary of State, who does this every day and believes that it's better to do a pilot with the municipalities first, test out any problems, address those things before there's this big election where they will. I think regardless of what happens with the machines, that same group of people is going to try to sow doubt into the election system.
Martha.
Look, I think ironically, it's not just the naysayers you're talking about, which are the Trump folks. It's also the folks like Stacey Abrams and her groups that are questioning these kinds of things too. And they're ironically in this kind of weird little group where they both want all the registrations to be on paper, and they want all the ballots to be on paper, which are the easiest kinds of ballots to interfere with. Okay, all you got to do is put a stray marker on a ballot, and then it has to be challenged. So I agree with Alicia. I think that the Secretary of State's office has done what they need to do, and I talked to Gabriel Sterling at length. He's going to come back and spend an entire hour with us and take questions from folks. It is I think it's the right thing to do, and it's the prudent thing to do rather than rushing into it and then possibly having half the machines upgraded and half the machines not.
Melita?
But all of these reports were before the Coffee County breach of Georgia's voting software. And that is not being considered or even acknowledged by the Secretary of State. That is not being considered by the State Elections Board. And so it may fall to some sort of hearing before Judge Totenberg because the lawsuit, which has been pending since 2017, she's already taken senior status since that lawsuit was filed. So it'll be very interesting to see if she steps in based on the reports in front of her and does something.
She could order paper ballots too.
Yes.
Oof. Okay, well, lots of election news this week. In a unanimous vote, the state elections board also said no to a state takeover of the Fulton County elections. Now, the board said significant progress has been made to correct any issues stemming from the 2020 presidential election. Melita, back to you. Lots of improvements in training, also in processes and procedures. So a big shout out, of course, to Georgia Gang panelist Kathy Woolard, who is the outgoing Fulton County Elections Board chairwoman.
Yes, I think we need to praise her leadership for stepping in, straightening things out to the satisfaction of the State Elections Board and the Secretary of State. And I think we'll continue to see similar leadership from the new chair of the Fulton County Elections Board, Patrice Perkins Hooker.
Martha?
Well, they still want to keep, Republicans off of that board, and that's something we'll talk about later.
Yes.
But I do give a lot of credit to Kathy Woolard because they did improve a lot of the stuff in this particular election cycle. Look, a big county like Fulton, DeKalb, Cobb, the list goes on. There's maybe 2 or 3 others. They're always going to have problems, and they need to stay on top of it. They can't rest on their laurels now that they've dodged this bullet, and they've got to make sure they keep it going.
Well, let's talk about that. The Fulton County Election Commission rejected a Republican nominee yet again for the County Elections Board. Jason Frazier had challenged the eligibility of thousands of voters. His nomination will not return to the commissioner's agenda, Phil.
Well, traditionally, since I've ever been in Atlanta, both parties picked the 2 people on the Fulton County Elections Board, and there was no problem. That was the party's right to do that. The chairman is supposedly nonpartisan, although that we could debate that another day. So now they're kicking off, to Martha's point, these Republicans because, they dared question the election. Well, you know what? Stacey Abrams and Democrats question elections too. What hypocrisy by the Democrats. So I think we're going to have to, unfortunately, change the law and get the Republican legislature to straighten out this outrage.
Alicia, weigh in here.
Listen, this process is just fine. They still have 2 Republicans on the board. But thank God that someone had the wisdom not to vote this guy in. Here's a person who's challenged, I think it was 12,000 people and their eligibility to vote in this election. He's challenging people like one woman in particular, her address, a domestic violence victim who used a P.O. box so that she could shield her address from her abuser.
Did you know most of those, though, were agreed to by the board, the things he discovered?
Great. So go to the Fulton County Board of Elections prior to an election and make them aware of these issues. Don't challenge people's ability to vote before you address those issues.
Well, both parties do that all the time.
Well, this is a guy
it's
who
called
doesn't
being a
deserve to be there.
watchdog.
Melita, weigh in.
His challenges to voters caused a great deal of extra work to the very people he would be overseeing, the elections board workers. And it would have almost been a slap in the face of all the hardworking elections workers to put in someone who made such a mockery of the ability to challenge.
But it's almost the best thing to do to bring into someone that has the most questions about it. If you really want to win people over, I mean, I've had huge success throughout my career bringing in the people that maybe had the most questions about how you were doing things and then showing them how you did things and then winning them over. So I think it was a mistake, but it is what it is.
All right, well, Georgia elections officials also cleared 2 Fulton County poll workers of false election fraud claims. Both Ruby Freeman and her daughter, Shay Ma, said that they had to live in fear through these false allegations. Melita.
Well, I'm happy to see that they are finally exonerated, and it won't give them back all of the sleep they lost over these false accusations led by the former president and his henchmen. But I'm glad to see that they're fully cleared.
Phil?
Well, let me just say one thing about Fulton County. The Republican-led legislature did major election reforms after 2021 to try to clean up a lot of the mismanagement and mess that was done by especially Rick Barron, who thankfully is gone now as the executive director of the elections board in the county. And the drop boxes are gone. That was a source of abuse. But anyhow, getting back to this case, there's nothing wrong with questioning something. Remember when they cleared everybody out on election night in Fulton County, and I remember the Fox 5 reporter and all the reporters told to leave, and yet they started counting. Now, you had to have questions, rightly or wrongly, and so I'm glad that Fulton County is doing better.
All right, Alicia, final word here.
Phil, you're right. There's nothing wrong with asking questions. What is wrong is when you're threatening the livelihood and the physical safety of a human being. What's been happening to these two women is disgusting. And I think it's just an indication of here's this former president who makes a mockery of our system. I am happy to see that they have filed some defamation suits. I hope they win lots of money for every second that their lives have been disrupted by this mess.
Did Stacey Abrams do the same thing, and was she a disruptor, or did you like all what she did?
No comment on that.
We'll leave it there. Up next, the politics behind the canceling of a political talk show.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
After almost 10 years, Georgia Public Broadcasting says it has decided to cancel the show Political Rewind and fire its host, somebody well known, of course, to all of us, Bill Nigut. Melita, GPB's new CEO says this is part of a realignment with the organization's core mission.
Well, I think it's a realignment with his hopes for the budget future of Georgia Public Broadcasting more than mission-oriented. The show was well loved in rural Georgia in particular, and no matter what Bill Nigut does with the show, maybe a podcast platform, the rural residents who set their alarms and made their coffee to be able to hear it at 9 a.m. won't have the same access to a podcast because many of them don't have broadband. I had church ladies in their 70s use language I'd never heard from them to talk about their dismay over the cancellation of this show, and they really are upset about it. It reminds me of when Lester Maddox in the 1970s banned the Atlanta newspapers from the grounds of the state capitol because he was mad at them.
Well, Phil, I mean, I took over for Bill Nigut when he stepped down as the political reporter at WSB. Big shoes to fill. And I talked to Bill, and he says this is absolutely not retirement, that he will be back one way or another.
Oh, I'm sure he will, and I won't take away from some of his reporting back in his early career. Some of the Republican critics, of course, say he's a sanctimonious blowhard, but I'm not going to go there. I'm just going to go to say this, that Georgia Public Broadcasting is taxpayer supported, and I think if you're going to have a political show, you ought to be fair. So I want to just focus on the unfairness of Bill Nigut, because he publicly said, I'm not going to have anybody who's a Trump supporter or anybody who questions elections that favors Trump. What kind of show is that when you don't have the diversity of opinion? This is a great model. The Georgia Gang, I think if you're going to do political programming, they could certainly watch us. So Bill Nigut, God bless him on his future career. How about that?
Well, Martha, I mean, you and Melita and I have been on Bill Nigut's show, so just kind of your thoughts on how this is coming to an end, and rather abruptly.
It was rather abruptly, but it is the end of the fiscal year, you know, so that's kind of when these decisions are made, Friday afternoon, close to the end of the fiscal year. We all know, we've been there before, right? It is, you know, it's disappointing because I really did enjoy the show. I listened to it every week, but I was more of a download, so he's going to be, meaning I listened to it on podcast. I was on the air when it was on. So he'll be fine. He'll do a podcast. But you know what? Maybe it's not the end. Maybe it is the end. Maybe he doesn't have any hobbies. I don't know.
All right, Alicia.
I just think that Bill Nigut is a legend in journalism, and it's unfortunate to see. I think we're in a culture of canceling everything. We want to ban books. We want to ban history. And it's unfortunate that this show, which I think has been seen as fair, is being banned or now being canceled. And so I just say congrats to him on his next move. I hope that someone else will pick up his show, and people who've relied on fair and balanced information will be able to get their political news somewhere else.
Well, it's really easy to do a podcast on your own. I'll be happy to help him with that.
All right. Well, Governor Brian Kemp traveled to the Paris Air Show this week, and Martha, he had several job announcements to make.
He really did, and you know, this really goes together with what I do in education, because the jobs are very technical oriented. It's good jobs coming into to the state, and really highlights how important it is to make sure education is meeting up to these job needs that we're going to have. So I was really encouraged by it. You're seeing a different Brian Kemp in this second term because he really couldn't travel in the first term because half of it was COVID. There were a lot of these trips that were planned for the first term but just didn't happen. So you're really seeing a different, on the world stage, Brian Kemp with a lot of job announcements, and I think that's good for him in the long run.
What do you think about that characterization, that it is a different Brian Kemp that we're seeing in the second term, Alita?
Well, second terms unleash a lot of new personality traits in any politician. When the second term means they're not up for re-election because of term limits. But these jobs in Columbus, it adds 400 jobs to an already 2,000 job operation, and it cements Georgia as a hub for aviation jobs. And that's one of the main thrusts of our economy, so to speak. And Georgia is now apparently the 5th largest exporter in the United States, and these aviation jobs are high-ticket items, and that will help maintain that status.
Phil, I remember traveling with then Governor Perdue to the Dubai Air Show. I mean, it was a big deal back then, and it's still, the aviation job market here in Georgia is strong.
Well, that's right. I agree with you, and you made a good point about that. And I think let's talk about the dynamic duo here. Not just Governor Brian Kemp, but Pat Wilson, who's the Commissioner of Economic Development here in the state. And he's going to be following up, of course, with the governor on all these. I think this is the 3rd trip just in this year. So we also have a AAA bond rating by the 3 major credit companies, only one of 10 states.
All right, we'll leave it there. Up next, a settlement in a high-stakes lawsuit in Rome, Georgia, over the contamination of its water supply.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
The AJC reported on a recent settlement by the city of Rome and its fight over forever chemicals. I cannot say forever chemicals today. From neighbors upstream. The settlement allows the city to build a new $100 million water treatment plant at no cost to residents. Melita, when we're talking about those neighbors upstream, we're talking about the carpet and fabric industries in Dalton.
Yes. And there were 32 defendants in this settlement that was just announced. One of the 5, which was not a part of that settlement, was the company 3M. And on Thursday, national media was reporting that they have settled a $10.3 billion, which presumably would include even more money coming to Rome. And so it's good to see at the same time health standards are saying these forever chemicals have greater damage than previously realized to the human body, just as they stay in the environment for longer than previously realized, that Rome and other cities downstream will be able to clean up their water supply.
Martha, this is a big win for the city of Rome, and could we see similar lawsuits filed over these forever chemicals?
Oh, I think so. I think it really opens the door. You know, I mean, they've settled obviously because a long drawn-out trial doesn't do anybody any good, so they've settled. But that's going to open the door for some other things to happen with other municipalities, other areas that are in the path. But also, I was wondering when I was reading it, is this going to unleash a whole bunch of these commercials? You know, are you impacted by forever chemicals?
The Camp Lejeune commercials,
that's right.
The trial attorneys.
Yes. Okay, well, opponents of the Atlanta Police Training Facility are now out collecting tens of thousands of signatures in an effort to get the issue on the ballot for voters to decide. Alicia, there was a delay in the process here to get the petition approved by the city of Atlanta.
Yes, there were a couple of technicalities from my understanding, but now, they're able to move forward with their petition. I'm realizing that this is just another rebrand of the defund the police movement. And that's frustrating to me because Atlanta and I think all of us in Georgia are concerned about crime and making sure that we're safe. 70,000 signatures is quite a high bar to meet, so I'm not sure they're going to be able to do that. All of their signatures have to be registered voters and people who voted in the 2021 mayoral or the election. So I think they have a high bar, but What I do appreciate and I support is peaceful protesting, and I think this is a form of peaceful protesting, so allow them to do this, but I think we need this safety center.
How successful could they be here, Phil? Because that is an uphill climb to get those verified signatures.
It is. In fact, the rule of thumb is you need to get double that number to be safe. Now, you can hire, signature takers, and I'm sure left-wing groups will pump in money to get all of those signature takers. But I say let the debate begin if they do get it. I too support the training center, and I think we can finally, it'd be great for national news if we have a resounding yes vote.
Melita?
Well, it'll be just very interesting to follow the progress. They've got a robust social media presence already. They're accepting volunteers. They're planning their canvassing efforts to go door to door to collect signatures. And it was puzzling to me that the city clerk, who was obligated to give them the petition within 7 days, took 2 weeks instead. Mm-hmm. That's just another part of the city's drag our feet PR plan.
Martha, was that part of the PR plan?
No, I don't think so. I think that unfortunately they just didn't get it together, which unfortunately happens in city government a lot when you're dealing with, yeah, it happens in city. But I love what you said about a rebranding of the defund the police movement, because it's like these guys went from, not very peaceful protest, very violent protest. Now they want to do this. And it's some of the same people. I'm not saying it's all the same people. But we have said we need better police training. This was a very robust police training center. Now it's going to be again. And I just don't I don't understand how defund the police people who were talking about training of police can be opposed to this. They should be celebrating this. And I look forward to it opening and training a lot of police officers.
All right, moving on. Congressional leaders unveiled a new stamp Wednesday in a Capitol ceremony commemorating former Representative John Lewis. The civil rights icon served more than 3 decades in Congress and died in 2020. What a beautiful stamp. Alicia.
Listen, I am so excited. I'm all smiles. My heart is just beating for this moment in history where we get to commemorate an icon. What I thought was interesting was watching Speaker McCarthy give his speech talking about the Congressman John Lewis. And I couldn't help but to wonder, when you are in a moment like this, and frankly, you are as divisive as this speaker has been, I hope he's thinking about his own legacy. And what will people say about him and his service to this country? I'm so excited about this, looking forward to the ceremony at Morehouse, and looking forward to seeing Congressman John Lewis on a U.S. stamp.
Phil, I don't think many folks are going to use these stamps. I think they'll be collecting them.
Well, as an old stamp collector when I was a teenager, it's always exciting to see, celebrities and icons. But I do think Nancy Pelosi was standing right there with Speaker Kevin McCarthy, and she needs to think about her legacy too, I might add. But that was nice to see both of them praise this, obviously, our congressman from Georgia, late congressman.
Congressman Lewis still bringing people together.
He was it was a great bipartisan show, and you saw the wonderful moment at the retirement of Johnny Isakson in the House when he hugged John Lewis. John Lewis was a uniting factor in many ways. And some people would say that maybe his congressional career was not as great as what he did before his congressional career, but behind the scenes, he brought a lot of people together. Not very many people would compare John Lewis to Richard Russell, okay? But Richard Russell was that kind of person too. Never was a chairman of a committee, never really held the leadership role, but understood the rules and got things done, okay? And John Lewis maybe wasn't the guy that was out front all the time in the Congress, but he got things done. He brought people together that wouldn't usually be together. And I think that it's a great honor.
And he was out front on the right issues, right?
Yeah.
Melita, final thoughts.
Well, I think it'll be fun for grandmas like me to buy these John Lewis stamps and have them as a way to tell your children about the ideals he stood for.
Good point. All right, we'll leave it there. Coming up, winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
First, I just want to give a shout out to Rob and Patricia Capusta. They own Companions in the Fountain Oaks Shopping Center in Sandy Springs. They're big followers of the show, and it's a great place if you need a little lunch place in Sandy Springs. I can't say enough about them. They were so sweet. They get a lot of Braves in there too, so you just never know who you might run into. Melita.
Well, State Affairs issued its first Golden Fork Awards after comparing lobbyist spending data for all Georgia legislators. First place winner was Representative Bruce Williamson, a Republican from Monroe, who forked up more than $9,000 of lobbyist meals and accommodations. Second place was Senator Steve Gooch of Dahlonega. All of those in the top 10 were men, 8 Republicans, 2 Democrats, each enjoying expenditures more than $5,600. Then for many people at the state capitol, services are scheduled Monday morning for Demetrius Mazakufa. He was a familiar face under the Gold Dome who represented many healthcare interests, including the Georgia Nurses Association. But he's best known as the person who drafted the film credits legislation, which led to so many Georgia jobs. Many Georgians owe their jobs to him.
All right, thank you, Phil.
Well, it's the 51st anniversary of the federal law, Title IX, which opened up women's sports. And of course, it opened up all these scholarships and opportunities. Sadly, it's being ruined by this radical trans movement. I wish women's sports would remain women's sports. I've got a loser too. We talked about it. I'm sorry, but it's Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State. I just don't understand why we don't go to paper ballots in light of cyber attacks and in light of the fact that Dominion is being questioned.
Alicia.
I have 3 winners this week. First, I want to honor the life and legacy of Maynard Eaton. We had his memorial service this past Monday, and what a legend he was, and he really made an impact on a lot of people, so we honor Maynard Eaton. I also want to make Theron Johnson one of my winners for the week. I am happy to be sitting in his seat today, but earlier he received the Dr. Wilbur T. Leaphart 58th Fatherhood Award, or 58, class of 58 that is, of Morehouse Award from Morehouse College, the Atlanta Alumni Association.
Nice.
So congratulations. And then I want to say happy birthday to my husband's Aunt Lamandia, who turned 80. And when I saw her at her birthday party, the first thing she said to me was, "Hey, Miss Georgia Gang." So she's a fan too.
We love it. All right.
Happy birthday.
So my
Martha.
winner this week is Martha Martin. She has been a woman that has been fighting for and been in a trucking industry. So she's my winner. And my loser is we got to keep fighting for Title IX and feminism.
Absolutely. All right, we'll leave it there. Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.